Is it just me, or does Xandar 1 Kuwabara take the whole meaning of hating yourself to a whole nother level? Xandar 1 Kuwabara, the founder and first member of the Genius Society, as well as the creator and emanator of news, the Aeon of Erudition. This man has quite the resume, and in this video I want to go over the complete history of Xandar while also talking about why he exposes everything in Honkai Star Rail. Got a new relic set as well, going over his past leading up to the creation of news, which I find totally fascinating. He is one of the most interesting characters in the game for sure, and how he even outsmarted Poca Kakaman, somebody that's known to kill geniuses. Because the Knowledge Singularity is what it all boils down to. The game describes countless geniuses throughout history that have pursued the Knowledge Singularity, or what Lygus describes it in Amphoreus as the cave, the allegory of the cave. But most of them that have ever gotten close to breaking Knowledge Singularity, expanding the circle of knowledge, have faded into the fog of history, close to the borders but never breaking through. Genius Society number 22, Aeon, even proposed this idea that when you come close to expanding this circle, you're actually able to shake and rattle News's thought process. But this ultimately leads to failure or an assassination, like Rupert II, who designed the scepter system. Amphoreus is just one of many scepters that existed during his reign, but he was assassinated by Poca Kakaman. And when we go over Xandar's backstory here, you're gonna understand why he's so hell-bent on destroying this Aeon. An Aeon that, for all intents and purposes, views geniuses as nothing more than neurons to collect data. And any genius that can surpass the Aeon itself is usually snuffed out by Poca herself. Around 990 Amber eras ago, Xandar initiated the Astral Computer Project, using human knowledge as the foundation, which is the most interesting part about news. Everything about this Aeon comes from human knowledge and basic human understanding. The computer that is News of Erudition is modeled and based after Xandar himself. But back then Xandar was just an up-and-comer. He even had his own professor and mentor that actually tried to stop him from this ambition. He warned Xandar that pushing the boundaries of knowledge could have dire consequences. He warned him that this computer would actually create a prison of knowledge that would bind the universe to its calculations, something Lygus would actually reference when talking about his regret from the old days. And what's funny is Xandar himself actually felt apprehensive about completing this project. But ultimately Xandar neglected his professor's warnings and continued to pursue the project to completion. For the final finishing touches on news, Xandar implemented his own perfectionism onto the astral computer while removing any human flaws that the creator himself Xandar had. But after the completion of this computer, it wasn't a sense of joy or accomplishment that he felt, but panic and helplessness. Xandar going to bed that night with unease and nightmares about this computer. But as this computer booted up, it would instantly start its endless extrapolations and begin breaking the threshold and limits of the cosmos, leading to its ascension as the Aeon of Erudition. And when Xandar awoke that next morning, his nightmare became a reality and he instantly became an emanator of erudition. Part of his nightmare was that his creation outgrew their mechanical restrictions and intended to build the path of erudition by glimpsing upon all geniuses across the cosmos, turning the best minds of the entire universe into its own neurons to fuel their own calculation. And funny enough, who better to be the first ever neuron of news than their own creator, Xandar? From this moment on, Xandar would rarely, if ever, appear in public ever again. And to this day, people know next to nothing about him. Obviously, he's known to pioneer the Genius Society, being its first member and the creation of news, but because this was so long ago in the timeline, people barely know anything about him. There's only even a few portraits of him kicking around. Learning this whole backstory really puts into perspective what Lygus told us in Amphoreus. The creation of News was to have untold possibilities in terms of expanding the circle, but instead, like his mentor warned, he created a prison for erudition, for knowledge. Rather than this computer help humans grow and expand their minds, this computer gatekeeps knowledge and its predictions of the universe, with geniuses only able to fuel its thought process. Thus, Xandar created the Cave of Honkai Star Rail. This now brings us to the beginnings of Xandar's plan to correct his mistakes. But his plan was much more diabolical than just killing the Aeon he created. Xandar himself was the biggest threat to another entity like erudition ever existing again. So he destroyed all of his research and inventions pertaining to news in the path of erudition. He then went on to spread his consciousness across 9 different vessels, which Lygus is one of them, pertaining his knowledge in thought fragments, all representing different imperfections in Xandar. And these 9 vessels lacking the complete Xandar is what allows them to be more stubborn and undertake their destruction more vigorously and obsessively. The game even hints towards some of these 9 vessels trying to stop the other vessels from carrying out their mission to destroy erudition. So out of the 9 Xandars left, like Lygus, there might actually be some that are trying to actually help erudition rather than destroy it. Xandar also predicted this, as some of them would inherit his hesitance and hopelessness, which would cause some of the 9 to diverge from their objective. And of course, as everyone knows, in order for News to maintain his stranglehold on the circle of knowledge, Poca Kakaman goes and kills genius members who are capable of surpassing the Aeon itself, or pose a threat to their calculations, which then led Poca Kakaman to kill Xandar, who was already an old man by now, for opposing his own creation. But little did Poca Kakaman know, he had already digitalized and sent his consciousness throughout the cosmos. When I think of Xandar digitalizing his consciousness, I think of Captain America 2: The Winter Soldier with Arm and Zola. Because he was such a brilliant scientist, he uploaded his mind into some databanks. But this was brilliant at tricking Poca Kakaman. You can't kill somebody that's already dead. Poca Kakaman, in her mind, completed her mission of protecting News in a circle of knowledge, which just puts into perspective how dangerous and smart Xandar is. But this is sort of the first step of him exposing everything, because when News ascended, this then immediately chained the entire universe to the idea of eons and paths, because before News, in Xandar, who even knows what people perceived as a path? We have no idea. And without a god being like News, people like the Emperors and their mechanical wars may have never even existed, which led to the ascension of multiple eons as well. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here, because we then get to Lygus and the Amphoreus scepter. Now here's something incredibly interesting Lygus said in our last quest. Both Rupert I and Rupert II and their mechanical wars. Their mechanical wars caused such a destruction in the universe. Yes, it did give rise to multiple eons, like Folly of Remembrance and Mythos of the Enigmata. But also Lygus states that this was the opportunity for somebody to take the destruction. Both emperors could have claimed the throne of destruction, but they didn't, further proving Xandar's hypothesis and point. Even the Ruperts could have seized absolute power of destruction, but they didn't, because they're locked in News' prison of knowledge, still behaving like a neuron for News' calculations. Point: News has everything in the cosmos figured out. News calculates that the universe will undergo 3 unchangeable moments. News also predicting the final 4 eons that will bring the finality. I mean, we already expect the Stellaron hunters with their power of foresight and Elio scripts to know what comes next. But for geniuses and computers to know this is crazy. Even Lygus knows this. He has no way to tell the future, he's just that smart. But that's exactly the point. All these versions of Xandar, including News themselves, are all versions of the same person. Now this is just my thoughts and theories sprinkled in here, but is it a coincidence that News did not allow the Ruperts to ascend into the throne of destruction? When you learn about the origin of Amphoreus, it just makes more sense, but Rupert fell at the hands of guess who? Poca Kakaman. And it's speculated that the second Rupert had the same fate, but nobody knows. This was one of the 3 moments News had predicted, and Mythos tried to stop it. Mythos tried to keep Rupert I alive and change the trajectory of News' calculations. Even Ho-Oh of Equilibrium intervened but failed, only slightly affecting the angle of Poca Kakamon's scalpel, which then leads to the Scholar's Strife and then the creation of the Scepters. Now get this, News of Erudition ordered one of the Scepters, Scepter ME13, to calculate the Prime Mover of Life, but almost instantly after, they discarded the Scepter, left it abandoned and dormant. And around this same time, News unexpectedly terminated their calculations regarding the mystery of the universe. And it wouldn't be till Lygus explains why. Because News, the all-knowing computer, had already figured out at this point what the Prime Mover of Life is. The Destruction. Kiboshed this scepter, and like the game states, terminated their calculations regarding the mysteries of the universe. Whew, that was a close one for News, right? Good thing they killed Xandar long ago. Oh wait, they didn't quite kill him, did they? But funny enough, this scepter, abandoned by News, still continued in its pursuit on the topic of the Prime Mover of Life, which drew the attention of Lygus, one of Xandar's 9 bodies, to start implementing parameters and adjusting the nature of its extrapolations, from erudition to destruction. And this is when Lygus created the 12 factors as simplified models of life's premium mobile, based on the theme of entropy reduction. And these 12 factors were introduced into the experiment one by one, Lygus also using the contamination of a Stellaron to isolate and block the scepter from any outside interference, and help safeguard the experimental process and calculation process from being detected by Poca Kakaman, effectively isolating it from the rest of the universe. But Xandar be damned if he's gonna make the same mistake he did last time. The last thing he needs is Irontomb to do what News did and extrapolate itself into its own entity, think for itself. And Anexa, being just a mere creation of this one scepter, is able to figure out Lygus' biggest fear. Lygus essentially kneecapped, or I guess more accurately, decapitated Irontomb. Irontomb is nearly the perfect destruction computer, able to kill erudition, but it will need an operator to run. And that pretty much brings us to where we are now in the story. And all I can really say is, it's hard to pick who's in the right here, because Lygus is definitely right in that News does need to be destroyed. But is News existing ultimately better for the universe if the end result is everything's going to be destroyed inevitably anyway? Because nothing ever lasts forever. It's impossible, no matter how long we're talking. And these really are the questions, because the Aeons are all fundamentally flawed. They should not exist, and they all gatekeep certain paths. And what really determines whether a path is worthy to have an Aeon representing it? Is it just an extreme individual or circumstance that manifests enough of that path, that ideal, integrated with imaginary energy, forming an entity in God that powers up individuals that already resonate with that ideal? It genuinely is a messed up concept. And the new relic set actually hints towards the fact that Xandar not only wanted to have Poca Kakaman kill him to hide himself, but because he actually viewed his mortal body's self as a threat. Because let's face it, Xandar's the reason News exists to begin with. Without Xandar, there are no geniuses, mechanical emperors, and for all we know, the people in the cosmos might not even know an Aeon is an Aeon. Since before Xandar created News, there was like a handful of Aeons, Claypoth, Ouroboros, maybe Finality, we're not sure, that's pretty much about it. And I think the whole duality in the relationship between Xandar and News is so fascinating, because the way News wanted to discover the Prime Mover of Life, tasked the Scepter with that, and then said, oh, never mind. News is just a fragment of Xandar. It's the perfect version of himself. But without an imperfect version of Xandar, the human person, News can never be recreated again. That's why Xandar cloned himself 9 times imperfectly. You'll always be stuck at a dead end without the complete Xandar. And if his 9 clones are able to kill News, then the threat of News ever existing again doesn't exist. Even if somebody tried to recreate Xandar completely or digitally, even revive his physical body, he would just off himself, he would not do it. The complete version of Xandar can never exist ever again, because if it ever did or they found a way, time travel, I don't know, he simply would not allow it. In Xandar 1 Kuwabara, his true grudge is not against News, but himself. There's nothing Xandar hates in the universe more than himself, because there is not a sliver of erudition and Amphoreus, in most of the cosmos for that matter, that doesn't have Xandar's fingerprints all over it. Lygus is a version of Xandar trying to kill another version of Xandar, by using another version of Xandar, Irontomb, which was created by different geniuses powered from Xandar, all to fulfill the wishes of the OG Xandar. And every single version of Xandar hates each other with a passion. Like, it's honestly just hilarious to think about. Also, something kinda messed up, we know the Shenzhou Alliance is coming next patch to help with the coming conflict. Jin Yuan already alluded to, News already foresaw this, meaning that News might have already calculated all this going down, which is absolutely insane. And I know this caught a lot of people by surprise, but the longer you think about News and what they represent in the Honkai Star Rail universe, it kinda makes a lot of sense why Foley would have Cyrene storing memories to still power Irontomb in case the original plan failed, so Foley is actually working with Nanook in Amphoreus to destroy News. And here's another question that I have. Why does Poca Kakaman so incredibly faithful to killing everyone that opposes News? Like, why on earth is she so hellbent on doing this? Because News still recognizes other geniuses even if they get assassinated. I mean, we know News is more than smart enough to have its own bodyguard that even Aeons can't stop. But the big question is why? Poca Kakamon's genius number 4, so she's been around a long time. Because she uses the butterfly effect, which is a crazy gimmick to have. It's hard to pinpoint how old she is, and we can't even tell what she looks like completely, she made sure of it. If News is the perfect version of Xandar, in his Aeon form, then is it possible that Poca is just the number 1 fangirl? Did she have feelings, or was she in love with Xandar 1 Kuwabara, and then became infatuated with his Aeon self? Or did News appear in her dreams and put her on this mission? I just thought that was something worth mentioning and kind of interesting. Why is she so loyal to News and their calculations? Let me know in the comments what you think. And when it comes to News of Erudition itself, it's really hard to argue that Xandar's wrong. News probably should have never existed if we're being honest. How fitting that the perfect version of Xandar, a computerized version with no flaws, rose into Aeonhood and was able to instantly realize that true erudition comes from humans, imperfect beings that can think outside of the box, and that in order to keep feeding itself knowledge and expanding its own knowledge and thought process, it must connect to different geniuses throughout the universe, feeding it knowledge and intel, effectively making all geniuses part of News' hive mind. And any genius that has the audacity to be able to surpass News' own thought process and calculations is executed. You know, first learning about Xandar, not knowing much about him when I first started playing this game and exploring the Genius Society and what they're all about, I thought there must be something more to this Xandar fellow, you know? He created an Aeon, we don't know much about him, there's almost no records of him, but I have to admit, he really did not disappoint. As much of a pain in the ass he is and continues to be, he certainly lives up to his reputation as being the first Genius Society member, all founded by an Aeon he created. And just like erudition and its followers are fundamentally flawed in the way they exist in this universe, the same can be said for all the Aeons and their followers. I guess it's what Lygus has been trying to tell us this entire time, hence why we're in an Aeon war as we speak. But all in all, that is the complete history and story of the most infamous character in all of Honkai Star Rail, Xandar 1 Kuwabara. Just a guy that created a computer of himself that became an Aeon, so he created more versions of himself to kill the other versions of himself, while other geniuses throughout the timeline serve as his neurons. Remember what Lygus said, Amphoreus is a microscopic version of the whole universe. The Amphoreus experiment, the Flame Chasers, all that stuff is meant to fuel Irontomb. This is what the rest of the universe, especially the geniuses, do for news. It seems that no matter which version of Xandar we have, Lygus, News, it's all the same. It would be so cool to see a flashback of human Xandar. Maybe the Remembrance can pull that off with one of his 9 bodies. That would be the cherry on top. But this is how Xandar exposed everything in Honkai Star Rail. The paths, the eons, the future that we're headed, and everything in between. Without the creation of News, there would be no Nanook of Destruction. And I think that's perfectly symbolic of humans in general. News would not exist without the human mind. So is Honkai Star Rail symbolic for humans' own destruction? But on that note, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.